morning again. I know that you've already been greeted several times. Now this morning we're going to be continuing on in our series that flushes out our new mission statement. And it talks about restoration and the different ways that we can restore. We are restoring relationships, creation, justice, community, your life, my life, our own individual lives. And we have been taking chapters from the book Next Christians by Gabe Lyons, and we have been pretty much preaching from those concepts. And when the sermon series was laid out, this was not the sermon that I had. But then some shuffling happened, and I sort of grin at the irony that I ended up with creators, not critics. Because when we think of the word creator, we think of being creative, right? We think of art and we, maybe sculpting and painting and those kinds of things. Well, when I am like at a women's retreat or something and I hear the word craft or the word art, somebody might as well have yelled fire because I am out. I am out of the room, calmly and quickly exit the nearest door. I'll go wash the dishes, whatever, because that is not my thing. For many people, art is restoring, it is refreshing, it is almost therapeutic. For me, it's just humiliating. Because when I'm done, somebody goes, "Oh, did your kids make that for you when they were little?" Like, oh, yeah, so I just don't go there. But luckily for me, and today, luckily for you, that's not the kind of creating we're talking about, because you do not want to experience my artwork. We're talking about a lot of other kinds of creating. And we're going to look at a passage in Scripture from Acts 17. Let me give you a little bit of background first. So in the first part of Acts 17, Paul has been kicked out of town twice. And so now he finds himself in Athens. And he's waiting for his co-workers, Timothy and Silas. And what does Paul have a tendency to do when he has free time? He preaches. So he goes to the synagogues in Athens and he preaches, and then wherever he has the opportunity, on street corners and so forth, he preaches. And as he goes through the city of Athens, he notices how many idols there are everywhere. And in his observation, he also notices one altar set up for an unknown God. And as Paul is preaching, it actually says they laid hold of him. So they took him and they drag him to a place called the Areopagus. Well, the Areopagus is both a place and a community of people. Like the Elks is a place and a community of people. And this is a place where they debate and argue, and it's very academic and philosophic, and they're always looking for new ideas. So when they hear Paul, they go, well, this is something we don't know about. And they drag him to the Areopagus and say, tell us more about what it is you're talking about. So, verse 22, chapter 17, is where we pick this up. So Paul, standing in the middle of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in the shrines made by man. Nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all men life and breath and everything. And he made from one every nation of men to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and set the boundaries of their habitation, that they should seek God in the hope that they might feel after him and find him. Yet he is not far from each of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we might not think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, a representation by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all men by raising him from the dead. Now, when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, "We will hear you again about this." So Paul went out from among them. But some men joined him and believed, among them Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris, and others with him. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your word, and may it speak to us today. And may you breathe your spirit upon us today as we explore what it is that you would have us hear and what it is that you would have us do in response to your word. Amen. So, as it says, Paul finds himself in the middle of the Areopagus. This is a very different audience from what he's used to. It's very polytheistic, which means that probably everybody in the audience believes in some different God. It is very, very diverse. It is very intellectual. And so he starts off by acknowledging how religious they are. I see you have lots of idols, lots of gods. And I see you have one unknown. Let me tell you who that unknown God is. And then he begins to describe creation and how God created and how God does not need man to create and form images to worship. They're just from their own imagination and their own hands, and God does not need that. He begins there and he ends with the fact that there's going to come a final judgment. And something very unique to this setting is that Paul never mentions the name Jesus. Normally that's, in every sentence pretty much when Paul preaches. But he's being very wise about the audience that he is talking to. They do not have the same exposure as when he goes into a synagogue and is trying to show how the prophecies of the Messiah to come fit with Jesus Christ. And he ends with talking about the power that God has, that he was able to raise his allotted person that Paul mentions, which we know is Jesus but not mentioned by name, to raise him from the dead, that he has that power. Well, here he has now divided his audience. They are split up between those that mock, those that want to hear more, and those that come to believe. So what Paul has created here is he created awareness, and then people responded to that awareness, and then he created dialogue, and he created an opportunity for the gospel for those that wanted to believe. Now, awareness is often where things start, and when we become aware of things, we might be offended. And this is a sermon that Henry preached a few weeks ago about whether or not we are going to be provoked or offended. Well, there are lots of things in life that ought to offend us. But the thing is we going to stay offended, or are we going to be provoked to change that and become creators? I'm going to give you an example of what I am talking about. I want to introduce you to my friend Jenny. This is Jenny. So, Jenny has 3 boys. Her youngest boy is the same age as my son, and they were in the same grade growing up in elementary school. And we went to the same church. And in a couple of conversations, Jenny told me, she said, I love my boys, but I feel that God has promised me girls. And I don't know what that's going to look like. How God is going to bring me daughters along with my sons. Well, about the time our boys finished elementary school, Jenny's husband, Mike, moved the family to Sacramento because he thought it was better for his business. Jenny didn't want to go to Sacramento. She really pretty much went kicking and screaming to Sacramento. But in the end, she came to realize that they didn't really go to Sacramento for Mike's business. They went because God had a plan for Jenny. Jenny was sitting in church and there was a guest speaker, and she heard these words: "We live in a world where children are sold for sex." And she went on to hear how in our world today there are more slaves than any time in history. And when people first hear that, they tend to think, well, what country is that in? Where in the world does that still happen? But Jenny went on to learn that there are more slaves in the United States today than at the height of the African slave trade. And she went on to hear of the horrors and the brokenness and the tragedy of sex trafficking. And her heart was broken and she wept and she said, "God, why don't you do something?" And she heard a voice that said to her, "You do something." "What? What do you mean? Me do something?" "Build them homes. Call them family." "Well, what is that supposed to mean, God?" And over the next several weeks, it seemed to Jenny that everywhere she went, she either saw or heard something about sex trafficking and human trafficking. And she knew that she had to do something. And first she thought, well, what developing nation do you want me to go to? And God said, no, right here. There is a problem right here in your own neighborhood, right here in the North State, in Northern California. And so she got involved, and the first two young women that she met who were survivors of trafficking, she adopted. Jenny had girls. God had given her girls. But she knew that that wasn't enough, that there were hundreds of girls out there, boys too. And she knew she had to do something. She couldn't adopt them all. So she started an organization called Courage Worldwide. And within Courage Worldwide, she built a home called Courage House. And she brought girls there to help restore them after the crisis and trauma of being trafficked. And then she also built another house in Tanzania, where one of those developing nations, we have a picture of her. So in the 10 years since she opened Courage House, she has had 245 girls that have called Courage House home and have called her mom. 245 girls. God gave Jenny girls. But the tragedy is that for the 245 girls that she has helped in California, she has turned away more than 3 times as many girls as she has been able to help. You see, Jenny's story started with being offended. She was offended, as rightly she should have been offended to hear those things. And at first she wanted to be a critic and shake her fist at God about why he didn't do enough. But instead, God provoked her to do something, and she became a creator. Well, I was just a creator too right now. I just created something in you, awareness. You may have known those things. You may not have known those things. I'm always surprised at how many people I come across who don't know them. But you can now never unknow what you now know. Awareness is a powerful thing, and we have seen some powerful ways of images that have been powerful. I bet all of you know what this is, right? What is that? Very few of you said that's a pink ribbon. It's a pink ribbon, right? But we all know it stands for more than a pink ribbon. I can remember the first time I saw a pink ribbon pin on the lapel of a coworker, and asked her what it was over 20 years ago. Well, now, we don't have to ask. We all know when we see that what it means and what it stands for, right? Awareness is a powerful thing, and it is one way that we can create. Now, being creators is actually a part of our DNA. Let me explain that to you. What are the first 5 words of the Bible? Okay, let's see how you did. I could barely hear you. Oh, not that one. Oh, there we go. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I'm not sure what the when is for there. In the beginning, God created. So what is the first act of God? To create. What is the first thing we learn about the character of God? He's a creator. And then Genesis chapter 1 goes on to talk about all of the things that God created, the heavens and the earth and the seas and the birds of the air and the fish and the animals and the plants and all of that until he comes to verse 26. And what do we see that he created in verse 26? Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image." What was the first thing we learned about God's image? He's creator. And if we are created in his image, therefore we are creators. All right? We are creators. I'm so glad you're excited to be a creator. But what does that look like for us on a day-to-day basis, to be creators? Well, I think it comes down to the situations in our lives, the interactions we have with people, our relationships. Are we constructive or are we destructive? Do we build up, encourage, restore, heal, and renew, or do we tear down, discourage, and stir up? And I think it kind of falls into 2 powerful places. Are we restoring our earth, or are we bringing dignity to people? Those are 2 powerful ways. Well, there's a little video that I want to show you about somebody who found a way to help restore the world and bring dignity to people. Take a look.
What has surprised me about being a small business owner is honestly how hard it is to run a small business and how rewarding it is. I'm so glad that we layered on a social mission into our work, because running a business is so hard. I don't know how much we up the degree of difficulty. I think that it's hard, so why not try and do something great? I think the thing that really got me about our criminal justice system in America is that somebody does something wrong and we give them a punishment. They do their time, they do what we ask them to do to pay their debt to society, and they come out and we never ever forgive them. And we never give them a chance to get back into the economy. I wanted to be part of giving folks some sort of opportunity to get back on track. And to me, I think employment is the best way to do that. Los Angeles was an underserved market for electronics recycling. At best, 30% of electronics are recycled. And I wanted to start a company that would offer those opportunities to people and provide a service that we need to better our environment.
It was so good, we'll see it again. No. So she started a business, or actually I guess somebody else started it, somebody had told me, but she has a business that helps to restore the earth and bring dignity to human beings by employing one of the most marginalized segments of our community. People who find a hard time finding employment. So, do you think I'm asking you to go and start a rescue or create a business? No, there's a lot of other ways that we can be creators and restorers. We live in such a divided world, and we see two sides that are often hurling rocks at each other and shooting arrows and are very destructive and not constructive. So what are some of the things that we as people can do? Some of you have started pretty impressive ministries and ways to reach people, and others of you have joined alongside of them and become active and a part of that. But what are just simple, everyday things we can do? We talked about awareness. Evil is like mold that grows in the darkness. How many of you would find mold in your house and leave it alone? I don't see any hands. So awareness is like a light that we shine on that evil. And once the light is on it, we have a responsibility to help eradicate it, just like we would get rid of that mold on the baseboards of our house or under the kitchen sink. We can also create dignity for other people, being respectful and honoring who they are. We can create dialogue. That's a pretty easy thing to create, but to create dialogue instead of argument. How to enter in and engage and be creators. We can create kindness. That is super easy. There shouldn't be anybody that goes out here and goes, there's nothing I can create. If you can smile at another human being, you can create kindness. Be creators. You can create connections. This is one of my favorite things to create. I love connecting with people myself, but I also love helping people connect with one another. And when I meet new people and they talk about, well, I enjoy this. Oh, well, do you know so-and-so? They like that too. And we can connect people. And through connections, we can create friendship. What a beautiful thing to create is friendship. We can create bridges easily between different people. We can create opportunity. We can create healing. And for some of you, you can create beauty. But obviously, our God is a God who creates beauty, does he not? I mean, do you watch a sunset? Do you watch a sunrise? Do you see the mountains? Do you see the streams and the ocean and all those beautiful things? God is a God who creates and appreciates beauty. And when you can and do create beauty, you bring restoration to our world. Just thought of this. The other two services didn't get it. It's a bonus just for you. If all of us are something God created, then when we look at each other, we should see beauty. God created beauty. God created you. You're beautiful. We are all part of God's restoration. We are all called to be creators. And that sometimes it's hard to get an idea of what that looks like. I don't watch much network television, but do watch a few things. And several weeks ago, I kept seeing a trailer for a new show. And at that time, the ideas about this sermon were circulating in my head. And there were several points in this trailer that really stood out to me. And thanks to Hines, one of our tech guys, he edited it for me to pull out the main points that I wanted people to see in this trailer.
The dean makes me tell it to every new medical director.
And how many of those have you worked with?
5 in 5 years.
Will everyone in the cardiac surgical department please raise your hands? Great. Great. Thank you. You're all fired. Any department who places billing above care, you will be terminated. So, how can I help?
This girl has been abused 3 times in the foster care system.
If you can't help Gemma as a doctor, then just help her as a human being.
Am I allowed to do that?
You are now. Why did you perform half as many procedures as your colleagues?
Because there's other ways to help people than by cutting them open.
Run the cardiac surgical department.
There is no cardiac surgical department.
Then build one.
Gemma, what do you want to happen?
Nobody's ever asked me that before.
They're not gonna let you come in here and just help people.
So let's help as many as we can before they figure us out.
Can't tell you how many times I've watched that. Still chokes me up. I hope you pulled out the 3 things that stood out to me in that. Is that people are more important than the bottom line. If you put billing above patient care, you're terminated. People above the bottom line. When the system fails people, help them anyway. Help them because you are a human and they are a human. And the last line, we're not going to let you come in here and just do good. Well, let's do as much good as we can until somebody stops us. This is obviously a fiction. But what if we did what we can to create that as a reality? Wow. Man. What a world we would live in. There are unexhaustible ways that we can be creators, that we can restore and heal. And we are called to pursue as many of those ways as we possibly can so that we can restore God's kingdom here on earth. One final question. What offends you? Now, are you going to let that offense make you a critic or a creator? Let's pray.